Yes, welcome back to the Magic Sponge podcast, the miracle cure for all your rugby league injury issues. I'm Brien. I'm the guy behind NRL Physio, all the content you see on social media. James, my co-host, is in on this lovely Mother's Day, James. We wish a happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Look, you're battling a little bit tonight. I think we were talking off air and saying, I don't think there's been a week where you and I have sat down here and we're not like we've had a clean week of health in our household. So I do appreciate you being here, mate. It's good to talk the weekend before Magic Round.
Weekend before Magic Round, Brian, and thank you for having me this Sunday night. I'm not feeling the best, but I'm going to push on and push through. And happy Mother's Day to all the mums out there. But Brian, more importantly, on behalf of myself and the Magic Sponge listeners, happy birthday, mate. It's your birthday today as well. It's been a big old weekend for you, Brian. So lots going on there. I was going to say in the lead up to Magic Round, I'm sort of tapering off this week, Brian. I'm going to be treating the body like an absolute temple between now and Saturday. And then come Saturday night, it's going to turn into an absolute amusement park, the way I'm going to treat it there. So it's going to be the tale of 2 weeks for me and quite a dichotomy there, I'd imagine.
Well, mate, I thank you for the birthday wishes. I had a little warm up last night where, being parents of young kids, we don't get that many nights away, but we had a night without the kids, went out for dinner, had a few drinks. I had 2 beers and I was ready for bed. Like that's where I'm at in my life at the moment. So I think I'm going to have to turn to the sugar drinks pretty early on next Saturday just to kind of keep me awake and get me through. But having the birthday today, I don't know if it was the smartest thing to say to my wife when we were kind of deciding who'd get the bragging rights for the celebrations today, saying that I was born a lot earlier than she became a mother. Didn't seem to win the argument like I thought it would. But I definitely knew where I sat on the celebration hierarchy today. But it was all good fun. The kids had a great time, and it was a good. Had the whole family around, which was great. So, look, guys, let's get into it as per usual. Look, we're on YouTube. Please get on over there, subscribe, review, thumbs up, all those things. This podcast is your one-stop shop for all things injury analysis in the NRL. We go through all the injuries. There's plenty of them this week. Loop it all back to recovery time, on-field performance, and SuperCoach and Fantasy scoring. If you like what you're hearing and you want more of it, patreon.com/NRL Physio, all the good stuff over there. The chat is going off. It was a little bit dead this weekend. Purely, I apologize to any patrons listening. I was a bit dead this weekend because, I had a big night last night and then Mother's Day today. So, but we'll be back into it next week and covering everything in there. But otherwise, let's get straight into it. The injuries from round 10.
I don't know exactly what he's done. I would have thought it was an ankle, but I'm just guessing.
He shouldn't be out for a long period of time. I mean, I'm no doctor. We have to wait for the scans, obviously, but that'd be more positive than negative.
Rightio, Brian, we're going to kick off round 10 because the 2 big names that everyone's speaking about at the moment, which has big implications for Manly and Penrith, and also the origin selections in the Blues setup. So Tom Trbojevic and Nathan Cleary both being categorised as a grade 2 hamstring injury there as well. So they're looking like they're probably in the ballpark of 7 to 8 weeks missing. So that's enormous news for Tom and Nathan respectively there. I guess to start off with, Brian, we're going to sort of pass over to you to have a fairly deep dive into these ones. But I guess the first question that most people are asking is why do these injuries keep happening, especially to these 2 players? We know Tom has a history and Nathan has a history there now over the last few years. Why do you think, what are the risk factors here that we need to delve into and for people to understand?
Yeah, so huge blows for both players, I think. As you said, 7 to 8 weeks out. I think before we hit that, I'll just say with both of them, grade 2, you'll often see me, and I think even in my post at Tommy Turbo, I said grade 2, usually 4 to 6 weeks, but can vary depending on the history and, where the strain is specifically. So grade 2 is a partial tear of the tissue, whether that be muscle, tendon, both. But when you have that history there, like Turbo and Nathan do, you're not going to see players come back in that usual recovery time frame. People ask why. Obviously, the biggest risk factor moving forward for hamstring injury is a history of hamstring injury. So you're more likely to suffer one if you've suffered one before. And that sounds pretty self-explanatory. Why? The reasons why, I mean, you've got every hamstring injury that you suffer, you've got scar tissue, neural changes, strength changes, all of these kind of things. And So like more often than not, unfortunately, as hard as these guys work, it's not always getting back to 100% every time. So it leaves you that increased risk. Now, yeah, like in terms of when I expect them back, I think for Turbo, it'll definitely be around that 8 weeks. I think my feeling for Cleary is they've just said 8 weeks to kind of be like, because 8 weeks, I put in my thing like likely ruled out for the Origin series, and people are like 8 weeks to have him back before game 3. And technically it would, but I just don't know now where, like, especially you look at that history, right? Where he had one last year, he's had another one this year. It took longer than expected. Initially, they were talking, oh, he'll only miss a week and he might be back the week before the bye. Then it extended over the bye. He still was having issues after the bye, didn't return after the bye, came back for 1 week, had some tightness, took the week off to kind of, and we were on this show saying, what a great move for re-injury risk. Like, how good is that? And yet now he's come out. So imagine if he had played last week, right? Like the re-injury risk would have been even higher again. So he's just had a really rough time of it. I think they've just kind of said 8 weeks to be like, we're not going to return him to do like an Origin and then trying to figure that all out with what's been going on. Let's just say 8 weeks. And if he comes back before that, which potentially with him, it looks like, and his function was definitely better than Turbo's. A lot of people have said that. Not that function is everything walking off the field, but Cleary definitely looked a little bit better coming off the field. So theoretically, and he doesn't have that rank history that Turbo has. So if I'm betting on one of the two coming back earlier, it's probably Cleary. But I just think it'd be very unlikely to see even Cleary feature in the Origin this year, because I just don't think Penrith want to throw him back off 2 hamstring issues, this one a bit more significant, and then throw him into the Origin arena, having to deal with loading and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I would be very, very shocked if that happens. Why do hamstrings keep happening, James? Look, the easiest way is the demands of the sport. So rugby league is a field sport. It is a change of direction, running, tackling sport. If we were doing a tennis podcast, we'd be talking about a lot of shoulder, elbow, lower back injuries, because that's the demands of the sport. If we were talking about a weightlifting podcast, we talk about, shoulders, lower backs, these kind of things. It really depends on the demands of your sport. And for field sports like rugby league, like soccer, like AFL, the hamstring is under significant load because it is really, really important during sprinting and running. So that is the simplest way. The other thing is, as we've spoken about just now, the high re-injury rate. We haven't, as a medical sports medicine community, completely figured out how to kind of get on top of these and bring the re-injury risk down. The demands of the sport are huge, as we said, but our testing to get guys back onto the field, guys and girls back onto the field, it doesn't seem to predict, you can't predict, oh, this person's going to be okay and that person's not going to be okay, which for other injuries, you can be a lot more accurate and be like, yep, okay, you've ticked all the boxes in your return to play. Your re-injury risk is down below 5%, for example. In hamstring, it's anywhere from 30%. It's usually around 30% in NRL from what I've tracked over the last 7 years, but it can be up to 60% in pro sports. In some soccer leagues, in AFL, there's been seasons where it's like 40 or 50%. So it gets right up there. I think you had a really good point. What's your take on why hamstrings keep happening in footy and rugby league?
Yeah, I guess it's just a factor. I don't think it's the be all and end all, but I think the thing that people need to understand as well is there's a high demand for aerobic and anaerobic. So that's sort of the difference between doing Ks, long distance stuff, big capacity, and then breaking that up with short bursts of high intensity activity. And that's really hard to train for. If you were just a weightlifter or you were just a sprinter, then you train at that intensity. It's very predictable. That's what you work at. Whereas footy does both. You need to have an engine to be able to go. I think the fullbacks these days cover like 7 to 8 Ks per game on average, is my understanding. And a lot of that is with repeat high intensity efforts. So those two demands in themselves can make it a little bit more risky for the individual athlete, I suppose, Brien, going to your point about, and we see this as well with AFL and soccer. These are two sports that have high rates of hamstring injury. And when you look at how hard they are to rehab. It's because, like AFL and soccer and NRL, you've got the aerobic demands with the anaerobic demands and the kicking demands a lot of time as well. Nathan Cleary is one that's got kicking demands. So there's a lot of different aspects that you need to retrain for and prepare for in that space, which is challenging. It's a really big challenge, isn't it?
100%, mate. And so the next question that I keep hearing all the time is why so many this year? Because we've now had 20 in-game hamstring injuries this year, with the yearly average is 23 for the entire season since 2018. So the entire season, 23 over a 26, 27 round season. We're 10 rounds in and we've already had 20 in-game hamstring injuries. We've also had at least 12 in training or in trials that have been reported as well. Now, I don't have the data on training and trial hamstring injuries, so it's hard to compare, but it's still, 12's still quite a significant number. Look, I think number one, I've had, and I'm not trying to big note myself too much here because journos looking for free quotes on stuff isn't exactly anything that you want to be happening on your weekends. But I've had journos like messaging me, why is this? Looking for that big, smoking gun. What can I report here? Why has it changed? And if this was 2020 or 2021 when we had all these rule changes and COVID and, all that kind of stuff, you'd be like, oh yeah, like this is the reason. Because and in 2021 I was saying it over and over and over again, like I can't believe we've had these rule changes in and around COVID. The injury rate was through the roof. It was ridiculous. That was the smoking gun, was the rule changes and all this kind of stuff. When you compare this year to 2023, for example, or even 2022, nothing's really changed all that much in terms of like globally about the sport. There hasn't been, we haven't introduced a 6 again rule. We haven't, reduced interchange wildly. Like there hasn't been a massive change in the game. And then the argument goes to, oh, they're training wrong and all that kind of stuff. But they would have been training wrong last year as well. Like I doubt all the clubs have come together this year and been like, oh, we all need to train this way now, which is very different to 2023. And now all these hamstring injuries are happening. So I doubt it's a rule changes thing. I doubt it's a training thing. The few factors that you can kind of look at, I think number one, it feels like, I'm not a weatherman and I haven't, tracked all of it, but we've had a lot of wet weather and a lot of soft fields, and people always kind of blow up and think that soft fields, like I saw it for Suncorp, who played at Suncorp this week, the Finns on Thursday night, and everyone's going, look at the field, it's going to host like Magic Round next weekend, people are going to be doing their knees and ankles and blah, blah. Wet, soft fields that are a bit choppy don't result in, or don't have a high risk of knee, ankle injuries, because the ground has give. When you do ankles, knees, those kind of things, is when you stick in the ground. It's nice and solid. Like you see it in artificial turf. That's when you do ankles and knees. But where soft turf really stitches players up is for soft tissue strains, because your muscles have to work harder to still try and run the same pace. So it's like running in sand or running in quicksand. That's the over exaggeration, is obviously to run in those kind of like, where there's a lot of give to the surface. Your muscles have to kind of push through that. And I know I'm over exaggerating here, but when we're talking about finely tuned athletes, those little bits can make a difference. And so for in the future, if you're looking at a wet weather game, it's definitely more muscle strains that are the increased risk. Now, I don't think that's the smoking gun factor or the only factor, but I think it's something to mention. I do think there has been a bit of stuff floating around. Once again, I think a few journos sort of tweeted it out, or I had a few message me about it in regards to like there being more ball in play this year. The NRL was saying there's been more ball in play. And if there's been more ball in play, there's more opportunity to get injured, number one. But number two, there'd be a little bit more fatigue too. So potentially, I don't think it was a massive amount. So not enough to explain 20, hamstring injuries already by round 10, but it's a factor. But I think probably the biggest factor to mention is it's highly likely we're just dealing with an outlier year here, because we'll talk about injury numbers globally very soon in the questions section. But yeah, I would say more than likely the biggest factor is this year has just been an outlier, and that it will level out, into next year or even later this season. You would expect it to. So then the other question that I keep getting asked, and I'm definitely going to throw to you here, James, because, as the two genius physios that we are, we've got to come up with a solution here, because people are asking us, and NRL clubs, you guys, I'm sure there's plenty of you listening. You guys are the most qualified to answer this question. So don't think that we are sitting here telling you what to do. You are the all-knowing, especially by the DMs you send me at, 9 o'clock at night when you're just abusing the crap out of me. You guys are the smartest. You guys are the ones who know how to fix this. But we are the ones who are talking to the fans, and we're happy to give our opinions on what we think, Turbo and Cleary need to do from here, because it's a really tough question. I think overall, I'd say that hamstring injuries are that enigma in athletes, as we spoke about. So they're tough. Even the best of the best evidence, the best of the best return to play, lists, the boxes that you need to tick, we still haven't figured it out. As a community, we still haven't figured it out. And my point is, if we knew, James, we would sell ourselves for $20,000 per week to get people to fly up to Brisbane and see us and come to our, state-of-the-art facility to fix it all. But I think overall, if players are still doing that kind of thing where they're going away for like a week and kind of immersing themselves in that, and that's kind of the solution, I just think we've seen that hasn't worked. Like it categorically hasn't worked. We've got Turbo, who's done it. He suffered another hamstring injury. We've got Latrell, who was dealing with a hamstring injury. He came back and had one of the worst calf issues he had last year. We had Jaden Brayley did it at the end of last year, and he came back and suffered a hamstring injury in the preseason. So it's one of those things where I think this kind of week, camp and all the power once again to the NRL clubs who do it. That's fine. And especially when you're dealing with these kind of guys worth that amount of money, you want to explore every option. But I just think we've seen the proof is in the pudding so far. It's a small sample size, but it certainly hasn't been this wildly successful thing. Look, I think, and I'm going to speak about this from a level of evidence. So in other words, the evidence that I know, I haven't read every paper ever, but the evidence that I know, and then also my experience in the matter. So like dealing with athletes who I find sort of have the best results. And I kind of have four components that I kind of go to in terms of what are the most important parts. What do they do from here? Top end sprinting running load. So I'm talking top end 100% sprinting, that like making sure that each week they do a certain amount, a good amount of top end sprinting seems to be really, really productive at reducing hamstring injury risk. So not avoiding top end sprinting, but actually making sure you hit it. And two of these components, so top end sprinting and running loads and eccentric strength, which is the next one we'll talk about, that was when Turbo looked his best. 2021, so he'd had 3 hamstring injuries by that point. We saw footage of him pre and post game. He was doing, like, I don't know if you remember, James, but he had that guy in there throwing his leg down at the ground, and Turbo was having to catch it, like that eccentric, those eccentric movements. Then we were having like weekly reports that Turbo, he would have a game where he didn't run enough, like didn't hit enough top end sprinting loads. So they made him like come in or stay back after the game or something like that and hit his top end sprinting loads. That's how close. Now, I'm not saying they're not still doing that. Obviously, we're not in the setups, but that is definitely something that I have found and that the evidence says is really, really important. Eccentric strength is strengthening while lengthening. So if you are either watching here or listening, go and type in Nordic hamstring exercise, and that is a really good example of an eccentric hamstring. So it's effectively you have your feet, you're kneeling, you have your feet fixed behind you, and then you drop forward and you're trying to control yourself as you're dropping forward. So as your hamstrings are getting longer, you're trying to strengthen them as well. That's not the be all and end all, but it seems to be a component that helps. Another one is trunk/core/hip stability and control. That is a really, really important, thing to sort of not put too much pressure on your hamstrings. And then one that I think is really, really important and good mentioning with your Tommy Turbo and your Nathan Cleary is running mechanics. Well, Tommy Turbo especially, because he's gone and changed his entire running gait and mechanics to try and get on top of this, and especially in around stepping and what I call out of normal gait responses. So he was a really good example on Friday night where he did his hammy in what I would call an out of normal gait response, where he was he stopped because the guy did a stutter and then he went to go again and he did a big lunge out. So he was out of that normal gait response, how he how his body dealt with that break in his normal gait or his normal running sort of cadence. That is really, really important, sort of training those kind of situations. So, yeah, they're my 4 pillars. I'm sure there's going to be physios listening who reckon that that's absolute trash and there's more. And all I would say to everyone out there who's listening to this and potentially saying, like, I know better and stuff like that, unfortunately, none of us know better. It's if anyone knew better, they would have the solution and they would be getting the people to them all the time with a perfect response rate. But James, before I go into some Tom Turbo past stats, I mean, have I missed any for you as a physio, key to fix what's going on with these guys? What do they do from here? Are you going to give us a nugget here for $20,000 a year or a week?
Well, I can try. Let me just say first and foremost, Brien, I, as my clinical role entails, am about as far away from hamstring strength and conditioning you've ever seen. So if you think of the bell curve, I couldn't be further away from this. But the only sort of nugget I thought and thing that comes up from time to time, which doesn't get often published a lot of, is about whether there's neural irritation or if there's a neural contributor there. But again, that's quite a specific test, and it's sometimes difficult to objectively quantify as well. Like there's a few clinical tests you can look at for particularly sciatic nerve, I suppose you could say, and whether there's a back co-contributor there, but that'll be fairly obvious in the individual athlete. So that'll be my only add-on there, is maybe there might be a neural link that we're not aware of, but we're not going to see that information come across our desks, are we, to be fair? So that'd be the only other add-on for me, Brien. I don't think that's a huge nugget. I don't think that's worth 20 grand a week, but I'll throw it in there just for the sake of it.
Mate, I think with that nugget, you can charge that because, the success rates at that $20,000 a week hasn't been fantastic. So even if we're not fantastic, as long as we're charging the good money, that's the most important thing. In terms of, I just had a few stats. Look, the guys, the legends over at League Eye Test, if you don't follow them, particularly on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, I'm sure they're on other platforms as well. League Eye Test. I was having a chat to them during the week, and just around like Tommy Turbo, obviously he's injured himself now, but like every week, whenever he had a down week, I was getting people message me saying, he's carrying a niggle. What's going on? There's still been no indication. And I wrote in the injury profiles in the preseason, this was what I was concerned about with Turbo. And we spoke about it ad nauseum, was the hamstring re-injury risk. But there was no suggestion that I doubt they would have played him with a hamstring niggle. There's just no way they would have played him with a hamstring niggle coming into this week or any weeks for that matter. But in terms of was he dealing with a niggle, League Eye Test went, here is some golden stats to give you some good idea of where he was at. So what I will say is Turbo, as we all know, his 2021 season was absolutely bonkers. Like looking at this table, is just crazy. But effectively, if you look at runs, so he's averaging 17.8 runs a week. Previous years, 16.4, 18.6, 17.4. So, around the same. In terms of tackle bust, he's averaging 3.8 per game this year. Past years, 3.6, 3.3, and then 2021 was 7.7. So like double, just mental. Run meters this year, 165.6. In previous years, 160, 175.6, and 190 or 187.7 in 2021. And then meters per run. This is where he's a little bit down, I guess, but not much. 9.31. Last year was 9.79. The year before was 9.45. And it was 10.8 in 2021. So, he's just and missed tackles. He's that's 1.1 this year and then 1.3 last year. But then the years before it was 0.6, 0.7, 0.8. So, Yeah, I just don't think that, like, I think a lot of what we were seeing, until I'm proven otherwise, and I'm more than happy if new evidence comes to light to be like, yeah, okay, he was carrying something that we didn't know about. But until that point, that there, plus the fact that we know that he changed his running mechanics or his running gait to try and get on top of this hamstring stuff, I think what people were seeing was different running mechanics, and B, a guy who was human, had a few crappy games. Manly, under the expertise of the super coach, Anthony Seibold James, they had a few shitty games, and Turbo wasn't immune to that. Shock horror. So, yeah, I think that's what it was. As I said, happy to be proven wrong. Sorry, we've gone on for 26 minutes about mainly about Cleary and Turbo, but I feel like they probably deserved it. We'll try and fly through the rest of the pod now. Anything more to add, James, or are you happy to kind of roll forward?
No, I don't think so, Brian. I think the overarching thing for the stats when you look at it from 2023 to present is everything's pretty much the same. There's not been a big drop-off. There hasn't been a big change. I would just add from an eyeball test, there probably has been a couple of times where I would sort of say, and I don't mean this as a slander to Tom Trbojevic, but it's sort of, there's been a few times where he's made a business decision.
Yeah.
And I think that was out of, Origin when he tore his pec. I think him laying out in the corner to try and save a try when they're ahead by 30, he wasn't putting his body on the line for that because, again, there's no reward for something like that in that situation. And maybe in terms of this season or seasons gone by, there's been a couple of times where he's taken a hit up and he hasn't run back full tilt. So again, just probably playing it a bit more sensibly and a bit more smart from that point of view. But yeah, it's sort of picking hairs, that sort of stuff. I don't think it's fair to say that he's been way off the pace from that point of view, and the stats back that up. So, righto, we've done well to get through all that, Brian. So we'll start billing it out at $20 20 grand a week, US as well, by the way. That's a good little caveat to add on to that one, rather than AUD in the Australian dollars. So for round 10, Brian, we're going to talk HIAs again before we talk team matchups. So Max Plath and Freddy Lussick are going to go through the protocols at the moment. So you've got to make some plans there for Max Plath owners in fantasy circles. So from the Dolphins and Manly game on the Thursday night this week, Jason Saab has been, I think, diagnosed as a grade 3 AC joint, Brian, wasn't he? He's a fairly high grade from an AC perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say on Max Plath quickly, I just remembered as you were talking about him, because I put that in there a long time ago on the HIAs. He, on the HIA list, it said not cleared for return. Now, usually 95% of the time, that means he's failed his HIA. So he won't be returning because he's had a concussion. But sometimes, and Plath seemed to have a broken nose, sometimes it's been, they've passed a HIA, but they've got a facial fracture, like Dale Finucane, the infamous, even though it probably ended up being a concussion anyway, they were like, oh no, he's passed his HIA, but he just can't return because he's got a facial fracture. So potentially it was just the nose. But yeah, so that's not locked in stone yet. I know I've had a lot of people, even Patreon, sort of ask me about that. I'm like, well, it's probably 95% sure that he's suffered a concussion here and will be missing next week, but it's not locked in for sure. Jason Saab, AC joint, grade 3. It's one of those things, we've spoken about it. When you tear it completely, yes, it sounds horrible, but you can come back without surgery. We have guys, you would have seen Herbie Farnworth took his shirt off in the sheds. If you're a rugby league fan like me, you love seeing Herbie Farnworth with his shirt off. And he had massive padding, a big sort of plastic, almost, padding joint, over the joint that's taped on to protect it. They'll get painkiller injections. So they usually come back. They can come back as quick as 2 weeks, but it's usually 4 to 6 weeks. So that'll be the thing. But as we saw with Herbie on Thursday night as well, you can have aggravations in game, and that's the risk moving forward. But yeah, I don't expect him to be out for, an extended period by any means.
Yep, good point there. So Panthers Bulldogs was the next one, Brian. Brad Schneider with the knee injury playing cup there. Eerily similar to a few of the other charge downs gone wrong that we've seen in the NRL of late. I guess I won't put Harry Grant's as a charge down gone wrong, because I think that was a refereeing decision gone wrong. But there's been a few of these ones come up recently where the kicking player's leg has been caught up, and in Brad Schneider's case, that's resulted in injury, hasn't it?
Mate, as someone who is like always on the side of player safety, right? Like always, and I get called out for it all the time. there has to be, like, you cannot, not all, I think I said a million times, like, not every hip drop is created equally. Not every contact to the kicker is created equally. And I completely understand. I understand even a penalty. I'm like, okay, try and knock that out of his game of like being a bit lazy in around that. But come on, like that was that was a ham up. That was
extreme. It was extreme.
Man, that was, yeah. But, and look, as we can see with Brad Schneider, this is what can happen if you get a bit, although I feel like this was a bit more than lazy. This wasn't a lazy effort. Whereas I would have said, Harry Grant's was a bit lazy, but this was just quite brutal, to be honest. So look, video wasn't great, but I think PCL or PLC, so posterior cruciate ligament or posterolateral corner. Now, they both sound very, very similar. They are in relatively similar spots. The video wasn't clear, but I'd say it's either one of those. He's probably facing anywhere from best case like 3 weeks out to worst case like 6 to 8 weeks out. So it's, I haven't heard much from there. I've heard potentially it could be 4 to 6, but nothing confirmed. But yeah, just a nasty, nasty tackle. And for those people who have Nathan Cleary in like 3 draft leagues and handcuffed him with Brad Schneider, like this guy, just crap. Just crap.
Looking for options there, Brian. That's for sure. You'll be deep diving on through the waiver wire for the weeks to come there. So next game was Eels versus Broncos. Billy Walters was ruled out of this one fairly early with a wrist ligament injury. Brian, I don't want to say it, but this might actually be really good news for the Broncos because that might mean a bit more time for maybe a Blake Moser, maybe a Corey Pakes, potentially a Tyson Smoothie. I think the Broncos might give Manly a big old rugby league humping at Magic Round on the back of this because I think Heavy in the press even said I'm sort of doing a drive-by on Billy Walters here, so I'm sorry to Billy if he's listening as a fervent listener of the Sponge, but I think Heavy said, the pain was too severe, he couldn't even pass, and I was like, well, that's not too much different to what we see from a week to week there, so that's just me doing a drive-by from the Broncos, mate. But this is actually very exciting for me. I really hope to see Blake Moser or Corey Pakes. I'm big on both of them in the setup. I think you might see a really slick Broncos unit on the back of this. He's in doubt for Magic Round, Brian. Are we thinking longer than that for Billy Walters? I'm trying to sort of figure out wrist ligament injury. There's a few options here, isn't there? But not many result in long absences.
Mate, there's 6 of us going to Magic Round and 5 of you Broncos fans and me, the lone Finns fan. I was just shocked that you didn't all cancel your Magic Round tickets as soon as your favourite player, Billy Walters, was ruled out. Like, that was what was shocking to me with how you boys go on about the big BW in the group chat week in and week out. But I don't want to lump on Billy too much. He's like a little, we all have fun with that because you guys love him so much. But look, wrist ligament injury, he copped a knock to it. I didn't see the actual mechanism, whether it was like a knock, like a bruise, or it like, wrist extension, like landed on the outstretched hand or something like that. So yeah, but I would more than likely say it's just something that needs a week or 2 off, and then he'll come back with it strapped. But look, hopefully for the Bronx' sake, Blake Moser comes in because I know we've spoken about it ad nauseum off air. They need to lock down Blake Moser and get him playing first grade at some point, because if somebody comes along and takes him away, that will be an absolute travesty, I reckon.
There's a few teams that are pretty cashed up, Ryan. So I think if you're a Sydney Roosters unit where they got a bit of cash to burn, he should be fairly high at the target list there, I'd reckon. Blake Moser has been doing pretty good things in Queensland Cup for South Logan. So we'll move on to the Tigers v Knights next, Brian. So John Bateman with a pec injury out of this one, Starford Toa with a hamstring injury, and Tyson Gamble with a lateral foot fracture, I think it's been reported as, Brian. So that's pretty bad news for Tyson Gamble, isn't it?
Yeah, you're thinking your 5th metatarsal there, more than likely. I mean, that's the fracture 9 times out of 10 when you hear lateral foot fracture, unless it was a lateral ankle sprain. But I just don't think it would be. So if it is the 5th metatarsal, like we're thinking, anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks, as we've seen with Mitch Moses. If it's somehow a lateral ankle sprain, it's like an avulsion fracture or something like that. But yeah, I just doubt it. That would be a lot less. But yeah, I think he's looking at kind of 8 to 12 weeks at this point in time. John Bateman with the pec, he isn't walking around with it in a sling or anything like that even as of today. So more than likely a strain than anything, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks usually with those. He didn't look all that bothered by it sort of leading into the half, although he's a tough bugger, so that's really hard. And then Starford Toa with the hammy, that looked pretty nasty. Like he was sprinting, grabbed it. So I'd more than likely say it's going to be a grade 2 as well, and probably that 4 to 6 week range.
Very good. We'll move through the Dragons v Rabbitohs because there's nothing to talk through that game. Storm Sharks, we had the Nicho Hynes, I guess, pre-game injury roulette here with a calf injury, Brien. And this is something to watch because Nicho, if people recall, started last year, was nursing a calf injury for the first few weeks there. I was one of the unfortunate SuperCoach players who didn't start with Nicho as soon as he came back, and he put up 180 that first week, and I forever couldn't get him into my team. So I learnt my lesson this year and got him from day dot. The calf stuff has been, I don't want to say recurring, Brien, but it's been on more than one occasion for Nicho, hasn't it?
Yeah, he's starting to get a bit of a history there. He's not at Jerome Hughes levels yet of like 6 in 6 years or something, but there's definitely some stuff there. Now, thankfully, this is a minor issue. I think some people describe it as calf tightness, and he's walking around, pretty gingerly but unencumbered. Look, he's no certainty for next week. We know the nature of calf injuries is that the symptoms do linger. Not only do the symptoms linger, but especially if you've got a history there, it increases your risk of re-injury. So leading into this week, he's got to they got to travel up to Magic Round. I'm kind of leaning 60-40 that he won't play, to be honest. And that's just a gut call. It's from nothing. Like I haven't heard anything, haven't been told anything. Just knowing his history, knowing he's got he's got that there. It was only, I think he found out Thursday, he said. So he's only suffered it Thursday potentially, is the way I understand it. That could be wrong, but as I understand it, he had the tightness on Thursday. So it means that for Magic Round, it'd kind of only be just over a week post-injury. If I'm wrong on that, more than happy to be corrected. But yeah, I've just got a bit of an uneasy feeling for next weekend. I'm kind of planning, and we'll talk about our trades at the end, I'm kind of planning at the moment to have him out and potentially have a guy we're about to talk about, Shaun Johnson, out as well. So yeah, I'm looking at moving in that halfback spot to get some trades because I'm quite concerned about Nicho. Where are you at with him, and what are you, like, you're obviously holding, I assume, from a SuperCoach perspective?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely holding, but probably looking to move Shaun Johnson on, I think. The Warriors, I thought they'd probably figure it out, but it still looks clunky, doesn't it? I think I've lost a bit of faith there in the Wars this year. They were so good last year. I don't know what the source is and what's missing, but I just can't get on Shaun Johnson, especially with Sam Walker repping a beard. He seems to be a completely different player. Now he's got facial hair. So I think I'm going off that vibe, off that facial hair vibe. There's a bit of an alpha vibe there with Sammy Walker now, someone who I have knowingly slurped ad nauseum on this podcast, Brien. That's for sure. So that's my plan there. Roosters and Warriors is the next one. Speaking of Sam Walker, we're going to talk about him a little bit later as well. But from Roosters Warriors, so Roger Tuivasa Sheck was ruled out pre-game with a hamstring injury. They said indefinite length of time missing there. So who knows what we're dealing with there. I don't know if you have anything to update, Brien. But the other ones out of this one, Shaun Johnson with a pec concern. Doesn't look like a pec rupture, but maybe missing a bit of time there. And Brendan Smith from the Roosters with a calf injury, which, is this just an update from last week?
Sorry, I didn't put that in there.
That's all right.
So that's
they're the three.
Yep, yeah, that's a calf. Like he missed. Well, I don't think he played today, did he? Yeah, I think he missed today. So
I don't think so. No, he didn't play.
No, so so he's out. Look, perfect example of what we're talking about with Nicho Hynes, right? Like last week, they said Brandon Smith was the chance to play on. They said, he suffered the calf issue, and they're like, oh, he was available if needed, named at the start of the week, and come to the end of the week, he's no good. These are calves. That's what happens. So there's your textbook example of why I'm concerned about Nicho Hynes. RTS with a hamstring post-match, Andrew Webster said 2 to 6 weeks. So that makes me think, once again, moderate strain. So grade 2. RTS, from what I know, doesn't have a rank history of hamstring issues, so they're not probably going to have to extend it beyond that 6 weeks unless he has some sort of re-injury in rehab or something like that. But yeah, I just think he's a trade, especially as you said with the way the Wires are going. I would just be moving RTS on at this point in time unless you had way bigger fires. And then Shaun Johnson with the pec. He was dealing with it, and I'm more than happy, as I said on this podcast many times, more than happy to say when I was wrong. I will admit I barely got to see much footy today, but got, the usual, Shaun Johnson's got a pec injury, phone's going off. So went and checked. I saw the mechanism of the Luke Keary tackle and went, that makes sense. That was the context that I had. He definitely suffered it earlier. But the thing I will say to Roosters fans who have just been pummeling my inbox telling me that I need to publicly apologize to Luke Keary, that tackle still sucked. He didn't mean to do it. It wasn't intentional. But what I'm saying to you as someone who looks at injuries day in and day out all the time, that injury made sense for that mechanism because there was a lot of force on his pec. It was stretched quite significantly. It was put on under an eccentric load. That is pec.com. So he may not have first, suffered the injury there, and I'm apologizing from the bottom of my heart there, but that certainly doesn't absolve the fact. And whether he gets a suspension or not, what I'm saying to you, I'm not saying that it is suspendable or whatever, because I'm not a match review committee specialist. What I am is someone who knows injuries, and that mechanism would have caused more damage, more than likely, to whatever pec injury he was carrying. I, as somebody who came in and saw it for the first time, could see an injury occurring from that mechanism, even if he had a completely healthy pec from the start of that tackle, let alone if it was already damaged and then put under that force even further. So look, the one thing I don't know, because they kept saying, when I went back to watch, they kept saying they're not sure if it's a contact injury or a strain injury. And it made me think of Jock Madden with the pec injury that ended up being a rib injury up high because it was a contact mechanism. So I wonder if that's something similar here. Obviously, that would be the ideal scenario, as it's more an impact injury, and then hopefully, there's not any structural strain or stretch there as such. But he'd be extremely lucky. Like that, if it was a contact, you'd be looking at 1 to 3 weeks return to play. But a bit like John Bateman, if it's a strain, you're probably looking at anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on the level of damage. But I think with that, I completely agree with you with the Wars. It has been killing me. SJ's still been scoring fairly well, but they just don't have it at the moment, the Wars, and I'm just not happy with how red hot the Roosters are. I think the Eels potentially can get a little bit better. So Dylan Brown might be a little bit better as well. I just think Shaun Johnson's a trade at this point. Do you agree, mate?
Yeah, he's on my probably trade list this week, I'd imagine, unless I get other bigger fires to put out there. But I'd assume he'd be one I'll be looking to move on potentially this week. I'll just see what eventuates. On the pec front there, Brien, it might not be necessarily a bad thing in Shaun's case because he has been managing the Achilles injury too. So maybe a little bit of time away helps on both fronts there perhaps as well. So be a bit of a watch for Shaun Johnson fantasy rosterers. So last game of the round here, Brien, was Titans v Cowboys. Hamstring injuries out of this one. So Jordan McLean, he's had extensive history of soft tissue stuff. Kieran, Foran and Phil Sami with hamstrings there as well. The other two players here, Harley Smith-Shields with a pec injury. That looks like it's a high-grade injury. And AJ Brimson with a groin injury out of this one. Hard to tell the grading associated with that. I guess we might as well just keep the hamstring ball rolling here, Brien, and go into Jordan McLean, Foran and Phil Sami, hey?
Mate, Jordan McLean, he has had, I don't have the numbers because today was pretty hectic, but if you stack them up, I did it 1 year, I think it might have been last year for the injury profiles, and it was ridiculous. The number of hamstring and calf injuries he's had, it would easily be the most in the NRL. If you think Tom Turbo has had hamstring issues, I would like to introduce you to Jordan McLean because he has had a lot. So I would be surprised if he's back quickly from that, but I guess look, they said that it wasn't necessarily a strain and that he was touch and go for this week, but just couldn't do it. But with the travel and stuff like that, once again, but yeah, I can't see them rushing him back. So potentially next week, but more than likely I would be thinking the week after. Kieran Foran interestingly said in post-match that he's dealt with this kind of hamstring injury before and was able to come back in a week. Now, him saying that makes me think, to your point earlier, about the lower back and that kind of neural irritation. So potentially he's got like that nerve irritation there that he knows what that is. He knows it settles down pretty quickly, because I doubt if there's any kind of structural hamstring strain he's coming back within a week. Sami, I didn't see the mechanism. I was busy dealing with all the other stuff, so I won't pretend to comment on that. AJ Brimson with the groin. As he was running through in the in-goal one time, I saw him clutch at it, and I thought it was a hammy, and I was like, not that a groin's much better, but it's definitely better than a hammy. And I was like, oh, my boy, AJ, he's been my guy this year. And I was just like, no, please, not another hammy. So it is a groin. It did look like he was in considerable discomfort. The one thing I will say about groins is they can be super, super painful, but they can be considered day-to-day. So day-to-day means they can improve significantly from one day to the next. So minor groin strains, you can come back next week quite easily. You can see guys come back in 1 to 2 weeks. If it's a moderate, that is more like your 4 weeks around there. So I would be leaning more towards that 3 to 4 weeks at this point in time, considering how much it was affecting him. But obviously, we'll wait for the scans. If you're an owner in SuperCoach or Fantasy, I'd probably be holding and just because even on return, yeah, the aggravation risk is there, but I'd still expect him to be pretty good. And then Harley Smith-Shields pec rupture, he's going to be out for 10 to 14 weeks. But Des interestingly said more than likely his season's over. So like whether that's just the Titans being like, if he comes back in 14 weeks, that's around 24, 25 and a couple of games left. Why bother? They're being more conservative. I'm not sure. How would you, if you were an AJ, let's play, hypothetical here. If you're an AJ Brimson owner, James, and it says he's out for 3 weeks, what would you be doing with him?
If he's out for 3 weeks, it'd be a sell for me.
Yeah.
To be fair, I think there's a lot of other options at centre wing that are catching my eye. There's a few people that are very reasonably priced. Probably the two big ones I would be pretty happy to go sideways for would be like a Greg Marzu. He's going to be pretty much 500K. I think that's just a no-brainer. The only other one who I think could be worthwhile will be Isaac Tungo. Once he comes back and sheds another price drop, he might be in the low fives as well, which I think is a really, really, really good buy on that front there from the Penny Panthers. So we're going to wrap up the injuries there, Brian. We've done well to get through all that, but there are more things to get through now. So Patreon questions, as we always do every week, patreon.com/NRL Physio. These are the questions that you get each week. This is what you get answered. The first one, Brian, we've got a few to get through again, so we'll keep the good times rolling. Is this the worst ever year for injuries? We've talked about that a little bit earlier, but there's a few more stats here you want to rattle off.
Mate, I had to go and get the numbers for the 2024 NRL injury epidemic. I think epidemic's the right word, or pandemic, whatever you want to call it. Everybody, and I think this seems to happen every year, is that I get pummeled with, this has got to be the worst. The game's getting too fast. Can't believe it. Look, okay, let's run through the stats, because I've gone and got the stats. So I can't, because I have people asking all the time, and especially with the hamstring injuries being up, because I put a few numbers out about that. I think everybody assumed that then all of the numbers were up. So let's go through, and I want to reiterate again, 2020 and 2021 were cooked with injury, like COVID affected. Both of those years, so 2020 and 2021, they averaged effectively 15 injuries per week. And we're talking injuries that happen during games. Okay. So outside of that, it's a bit hard to track because teams aren't the best at reporting those kind of things. So 15 injuries per week occurred during games in 2020 and 2021. So 2019 to 2023, so all the other years outside of 2020 and 2021, they all averaged between 12 and 13 injuries a week. So I think the best year was 2022. It was like 11.9 injuries since 2019. And that's 2019 before all the rule changes, right, as well. So before the rule changes, it was still at around 12 to 13 injuries per week in 2019. 2024, here we go. Drum roll, please. 13.3 injuries per week. So, like, even if you look at round 10, which we'd all sit here and say, what a horrible round for injury round 10 was, there were 14 in-game injuries in round 10. So it's just not that increased. I totally get it. And I think what I'll go to, it's just big name injuries. There has been so many big name injuries. And I think that's such a hard thing to quantify, right? Like how big a name, these injuries, maybe if you went to by salary or something like that, you could do a calculation. But by far this year for big namers, and I think as draft players as well, that's probably where I judge it, is I've just seen so many draft teams just get absolutely romped because their first, like, I think I told the story a couple of weeks ago, one of my draft teams, I out of 50 possible games in the first 10 rounds, I had 22 games. So 28 games, my top 5 picks missed, which is just bonkers in the first 10 weeks. And that's happened to people all across. So I think that is the thing. The main point here is that injuries, in terms of if you count every single injury as one individual injury moving forward, it's not that increased. It's just not. And I'm sure the NRL will probably, by the time you listen to this, Graham Annesley will probably address it at his conference tomorrow, potentially. They usually like to do those things. Interestingly, I think I checked in, one of the journos had sent me something earlier in the season, and I had it at 13.5 per week, and the NRL's official numbers had it about 10.5 per week. So that's a bit interesting when in-game injuries, are pretty easy to spot and not hard to record. So that was an interesting discrepancy, and to explain why there may be a discrepancy if you see some things come out of the NRL tomorrow. But yeah, even the number of players listed in the casualty ward. So if you go to the casualty ward and see the global number, like global injury numbers, that's still very similar as well. So I think this year it's just very, very heightened because there has just been so many big namers. I haven't done the major injury numbers yet, so I will caveat that by saying potentially there's more big, like 4+ week injuries. But in terms of globally, injury numbers, 13.3 per week. Previous years averaged 12 to 13 per week. Yeah, it's just not there. So I'm sorry to let everyone down who wants to think that this is the worst it's ever been. And the number of questions, and we'll get some, I think the very next question is an interesting one when you look at these numbers. But yeah, it's just not that all that increased.
Very true, Brian. So next one, like you said, was about, could the fact be that we're seeing rule changes, which are speeding the game up, keeping ball in play, could they be a factor for injury contribution that we're seeing at the NRL level?
Yeah, and look, I think even though the numbers are relatively similar, I still think this is a valid question because it's all about a balance, and we've spoken about this before: performance versus injury risk. Those two things can sit at either end of the spectrum, because if you get too high performance, then the collisions are too huge, and it can cause like catastrophic injuries that way. So it's all about a balance. I think in 2020 and 2021, I sat on here and I'm more than happy looking back and say that absolutely the rule changes were speeding the game up way too much in too short a time frame. So teams couldn't prepare for it. They had no way to get their sport science, their training schedules under control. And we saw it in the increase in injuries for those years. I think at the moment, teams are preparing relatively well for it, despite the toll that we're seeing. I think if they keep going down the path, there may be a point where it, really dives off. But I think for the moment, I think it's relatively good because teams have had time. And we've seen that because there were 15 injuries per week, in those weeks, 2020 and 2021. But now 22, 23, 24, it's come back down to that normalized, 12 to 13. Because teams more than likely, and for those people who say they don't like warm-ups and they don't like people training too hard, that's what they've had the ability to do. The reason, and the COVID is the perfect argument for why it's so important for these guys to train so hard, is during COVID, they couldn't because they were in isolation. All the training schedules were all off whack, and the injuries went through the roof because they're still trying to perform really highly. I mean, I'm sure you'd probably agree with that training is really, really important to prepare them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the nuts and bolts of why strength and conditioning are on the scene for NRL clubs, isn't it? And have been for decades now. So that's a very important consideration. Question 3, Brian, is about Jason Saab and his high-grade AC joint injury. So the question from Patreon is about how do players avoid surgery for a ligament that's completely torn? So I guess we're talking AC joint there with Saab, but there's a few other sort of examples we can give here as well, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. I think, if I end up doing up a reel for this segment, I could put up a lot of flashes of different players with what we call a step deformity. So if you look at the shoulder, it's where the collarbone sits raised up because that's the ligament that gets torn. It's the ligament between your collarbone and your scapula or your shoulder blade where it comes up to the tip of the shoulder there. That ligament completely tears. So the collarbone sits up and you get a step off the edge of your shoulder. And so more often than not, I mean, there's obviously degrees of this, and sometimes that grade 3 or complete tear can result in too much of a shift of the collarbone or the shoulder blade, and it can require surgery. But more often than not, the way I describe it to a lot of patients, it's an aesthetic thing. So in other words, it's the way it looks. It doesn't look the nicest. It looks a bit gnarly, and I have people message me all the time about guys like Val Holmes, Ryan Pappenhausen, Cam Murray being like, what the hell is going on with their shoulder? Kalen Ponga, perfect example. But yeah, it's a joint, the AC joint. It's not like an MCL. So an ACL, you tear it, they get surgery to reconstruct the ligament. An MCL, they tear it, they often don't get surgery, but they go on a knee brace and that ligament knits back together again. So you actually get a whole new MCL there. The AC joint just stays torn more often than not. It can heal in some cases, but more often than not, it just stays torn. It's because it's a joint that doesn't need to still be together for you to function as a human being more often than not, and even play footy. It leaves you a bit more susceptible to aggravations, as we spoke about, because that shoulder isn't quite as structurally sound as a shoulder that has an intact AC joint. But it is not a joint that is structurally required to be together for you to play footy. It's that simple. The way the biomechanics of the shoulder allow you to strengthen up the muscles around there, work on the range of movement, and you can still, perform as a footy player completely fine.
Next one, Brian, is about Joey Manu, and I didn't see this game, so you might be able to shed some more light here. But in the final 1 or 2 minutes, it looked like he had maybe some concussion signs there, or Category 1 symptoms, maybe. Assume that he might need to enter the concussion protocol, perhaps this week, depending on what team lists say. What did you see in that game, and what can we say to the Patreon here asking that question?
Yeah, it was in the last 30 seconds. He got rocked pretty heavily, so he got hit in the head and went down. He didn't look like he showed that much protective action on the way to the ground, but it's one of those things where I would look at it and go, oh yeah, Cat 1. And that's what the question has said, is that, yeah, it looked like Category 1 symptoms. What I'm saying to you is that for me, it looked Cat 1, but I think there was enough grey area there that they will be able to argue that it wasn't Cat 1 and that it was Cat 2. Because he fell without what I thought was protective action because he went limp, but his arms were out in front of him and hit the ground first. So I can see them potentially arguing that no, like he had his arms out and that broke his fall, and that and he didn't visibly stumble. He looked a little bit jelly, but he didn't stumble or lose his balance or have gross motor incoordination. So all I'm saying is that we might hear more about it in the coming days, but I don't think it's the smoking gun that some of them are. Just purely because I've seen these time and time again. I would term it a Category 1, but I've seen it time and time again where I look at it and go, oh yeah, and somehow they're out there playing the next week.
Yeah, one to keep an eye on, I think, Brian. So the next question is about how can the NRL, and then even to levels at community footy, I guess, eliminate the hip drop tackle or minimize that as much as possible, because there's so many injuries to ankles and knees associated with this. But guess we've sort of seen what can happen at an NRL level. What do you think sort of going down the food chain there a little bit lower to grassroots there, Brien? What do you think can be done at those levels?
Tackle technique, it's huge. I got really frustrated. In the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 female patients come in as people who have taken up the game as like 14, 15-year-olds. And they said that the club that they went to just kind of threw them straight in, didn't do like tackle ready stuff, nothing, just went, yeah, let's get you going. You're keen. And both of them came to me with tackle injuries, like, from poor tackle technique. Like both their mums have sons who play, and they were like, yeah, they were just horrible. Like they didn't know what they were doing. And I was just like, oh my God. So the big thing for me is tackle, teaching guys and girls, if they're in those positions where it'd be easiest to just grab on, swing the hips and drop, it's teaching them to not do that, how to grip and then slide down the back of the tackler. Yes, it may result in more missed tackles potentially because you slip off a tackle, but you also then won't, get penalized, be suspended, because that's my other answer is how can the NRL and even to community footy eliminate this tackle? Unfortunately it's suspensions. And I know people don't like that. They don't, but there's so much evidence. And once again, I pull back to, this isn't even really my opinion in terms of like, I think this, it's like, I just see the evidence on so many studies of punishment driving behavior change in sport. This isn't like, obviously that works in society to varying levels. I'm talking about more in sport punishment. And we've seen it from the Super League, I think, to a degree, in that they've done this whole thing of bringing the tackle height right down and doing heaps of suspensions early in the season. Everyone hated it. It was horrible. Whereas now guys are getting lower and there's not as many of those high tackle penalties. It sucks at the start. And I think there's a way you can do it that probably isn't the way rugby union has done it, which we've spoken about in the past as probably being way too extreme and way too light on, light off, like flick the switch. I think there's a more gradual way you can do it. But yeah, unfortunately, it's like if there's a bad hip drop tackle, it's punishing it adequately.
This next one, Brian's a good one. It's sort of right in my wheelhouse, but it's very facetiously written about what are the overs and unders for Bill Knowles and US rehab treatment getting a reference in the media this week with all these hamstring injuries. That's very good.
Mate, I already saw it. The first article I read, I think it was Sydney Morning Herald, was they were talking about the US. They're talking about Qatar. I think there's the Aspetar guys over there. They're talking about Melbourne, David Opar down there. It's just they did to credit and to credit, Penrith's medical staff. They have been, their record with injuries in the last like 4 or 5 years has been so good. So it said the preference was to keep him in-house and manage it in-house by the club. And I would completely agree with that. Like what we spoke about before, I don't know how much these guys are getting out of these 1 week jaunts to places of like, let's go. And even if they come back and put into practice, I think it's I think leave it to the club's medical staff, get the right people in there, because Penrith have done so well in all these years. And I don't think Cleary suffering a couple of hamstring injuries, when we know the nature of hamstring injuries, I don't think all of a sudden you go, we need to go outside from Penrith, because they've got the runs on the board so far. So yeah, but overs unders, I reckon it'll be 6, 7 maybe. What do you got for me?
I reckon about 5 or 6, definitely. There'll be a few people lining up to espouse some knowledge there, Brien. So we'll watch the print media with sort of bated breath there this week, I reckon, about the rehab focus and where people should be going. Last two are a little bit lighter questions, Brien. The first one is about, not really injury related, but who you're picking to play fullback and halfback for Queensland and the Blues. I think that's Queensland sort of picks itself, doesn't it? But the Blues is a bit more interesting to chat about them, I think.
Yeah, I think DCE, Reece Walsh pick themselves. For the Blues, obviously with Cleary out, if Nicho is fit, he is easily my halfback. I know Moses, I think it'll be, if they're both fit, it should be Hynes and Moses. So I don't know who you want to call your halfback or your 5'8" in that kind of twosome. But if I could only pick one half and put them in there, it would be Nicho for me. And then fullback, I think Teddy. I think with the Cleary out, and the likely halves combo, I just think, I think Teddy's shown enough. Like he wasn't fantastic in Origin last year, but man, the Roosters are looking good, and Teddy looked real good today. And that's not like, I think Dylan Edwards is one of the best fullbacks in the comp. I think, Scotty Drinks, obviously the Cows aren't doing that well, so that probably hits him a little bit. But yeah, I just think Teddy, there was, and not that I'm saying Teddy is Billy Slater, but there were, those times. I know, I'll put it this way, as a Queensland fan, I would be most worried about Teddy being on the end of that back line, just because I think you get that PTSD of what Teddy's done to us in the past. But yeah, that would be me. What about you, mate?
Yeah, boringly, I'm exactly the same, Brian. So I don't really have any advancement to make there. I think Nicho's the 7. He's been very, very good for a long period of time now. I think you give him his best spot. And I think Tedesco, you go back to there. I know Dylan Walker's get a lot of. Sorry, Dylan Edwards, not Dylan Walker, my apologies. So Dylan Edwards has got a lot of hype in the media at the moment. I, as a Queensland fan, would say I'd be more concerned if they picked Tedesco at fullback with a point to prove. I think you see a highly motivated Tedesco. He's played so many big games of footy. He's had some really good games at Origin level, Brian, as well. I think you could make it. You could make a team work around him at the back there. Lucky last. How come the Finns haven't extended Cody Nikorima though, Brian? Because Cody's been on fire. There's been try-assists deluxe. Why haven't they re-signed him again? What's going on? What's
Mate,
Christian Wolf thinking?
The Finns, they've made some questionable decisions, like letting Val Tafare go and now not re-signing Cody yet. I think they are in negotiations, but these are to lift the lid for the listeners a little bit. Back when, before the Finns existed and Cody was ripping it up at number 14 for the Bronx week in and week out, I was a big proponent in our group chat full of Bronx fans that I wanted Cody in the halves. I just wanted him in the halves. I was like, nah, Milford, no good. This was after the 2015. I was just like, it happened. Milford was obviously lights out, but sort of in those years where I was like, Cody's the player. He's so good. And we used to G it up. I think I even got a shirt made with Nikorima number 14 on the back or something like that, which was pretty funny. So Cody's my guy. He's been my guy forever. It's a bit of a G up, but also I love it. And I just want him in the team. Come on, Finns. Do one good thing, right? I know you let Val go, but sign Cody up. All right, let's run through our Supercoach stuff. We've been here for long enough already, but I do want to hear what you're going to do, James, because you made one of the all-time calls this week to knock up a massive score. Mate, you're our Supercoach expert for a reason. Hit me with it because you are well and truly the expert this week.
This is a wild old week, Brian. I've called it like the tale of two coin flips for my team. So my initial plans were getting in Armstrong for Schiller and then getting in Britton Nikora for Joe Chan. So they were my two trades, and that was going to be what I was going to be doing up until Saturday afternoon. So the first thing I did, which was the first coin flip, which was actually a bed shit, so I'm happy to wear this one, was I had to pick out of Appy Coruscant and Bradman Best as my final reserve. So I thought, wet weather footy, the forecast is for wet weather. Appy's probably going to be goal kicking again, even with Sullivan in the team. I'll just go pretty safe and go on Appy, and then Bradman Best pumped out 124, and I was like not having a good time. Then I saw Nicho was out sort of late Saturday afternoon, so I was in a panic because I was like, well, I don't want Britton Nikora on my team anymore. So I sort of frantically tried to come up with a different plan. And the only thing I could do was trade Simi Sasangi to Dom Young. So what I did was I traded into Dom Young, and then I had no captain options left by this stage. So I had a choice of Dom Young or Joey Manu. So I went coin flip. I've already had a bedsheet week. I'll just go to Dom Young. And so my bedsheet week turned into a beauty of a week. So I ended up rattling a score of 1260 off the back of that. And that was even getting an AE out of, I think it was Brendan Piacura. So I just got stupidly lucky off the back of that one trade, which just saved my bacon this week, Brian. So one bedsheet, one very good move, probably one of my better trade-ins that I can sort of recall. But again, is that Supercoach expert or is that just really dumb luck? I'm happy to put it down to dumb luck, to be honest. I think it was just one of those things. I was just shooting for the stars and I sort of somehow hit it. So anyway, that's what happened. This week, Tommy Turbo's out, Drinky's in. And the one thing that's going to be interesting for me to watch is whether Trey Fuller gets named this week with Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow coming back. I don't know, with the way Fuller's going with the work rate, with how busy he's been, even Wayne wrapped him in the presser. Wayne said, how good was his courage? How courageous is he to play? How tough is he? That's pretty big for Wayne to praise someone like that publicly. So hopefully Trey Fuller can get the fullback spot again for another week or a week or two, or he can go all the way through until round 13. I don't really know what's going to happen there. And we'll see, I guess, Brian. That's going to be a super interesting watch. I'm happy with the price rises coming in for Trey Fuller regardless at the present, and he's scoring well. And man, that chip and chase try is just rugby league box office stuff. Like, we don't need to talk about that for too long because bloody hell, when I saw that happen, I was like out of my seat, frothing it hard. If you don't have Trey Fuller in your fullback setup, I feel sorry for everyone out there who doesn't have him there, because that was about as good as it gets from a fantasy point watching that happen on the night. So second trade, apart from Drinky and Turbo doing the switcheroo, still like Britain Nakora at second row forward, but it will depend on Nicho. I tend to think it'll either be Britain Nakora in at second row, or I'm still kind of keen on Samuela Fainu in at front row forward for enough. So I could trade out Tuivasa Sheck for Samuela Fainu. He's still getting 80 minutes on an edge for the Tigers. And I know he hasn't been scoring huge amounts of points. The Tigers have such good bye coverage, so he gives you a really good option in front row or second row, whichever way you want to rotate him through there. I still don't think he's a bad play, and I think the attacking stats will come there. He hasn't had much in the way of try assists, line break assists, even offloads. I would anticipate that'll change and change soon. So
Because
Samuela Fainu,
he played centre for a bit too, because like almost like the second half, didn't he? Because I think Bateman went out there to cover Toa,
yeah,
and then Bateman went off. So I'm pretty sure Fainu played out there as well. So
yeah, I'm not sure. Well, whoever played on Bradman Best got an absolute bath. So, which wasn't my favourite thing to see from my bench. But
I think it might have been Fainu
so,
actually. I think
yeah, well,
side, yeah.
yeah, probably was, because I think Best had about 4 line breaks and 1,000 points. So that was good to see from my pine. But I'll get some price rise out of that, so that'd be good. But the one we talked about earlier, I think it's Shaun Johnson and Sam Walker, isn't it, Brian? Sam Walker, the beard's in play, the vibes are good. You could make an argument that he's playing better footy than DCE at the present, even. You know, I know DCE's got a mortgage on the Queensland jersey, but if Sammy Walker got named, I wouldn't be super upset, I've got to say. I wouldn't mind it. It'd be bold, and I don't think Billy will do it. Boy, oh boy, probably not a bad series to do it either, with no Cleary there. Maybe New South Wales with a very different sort of setup there. You know, Michael Maguire's new to the coaching scene. Who knows what that Blues team's going to look like? It's going to be so interesting to watch in the next few weeks. But tell you what, Sammy Walker, if anything happens to DCE, which is very unlikely because DCE is just an absolute Iron Man when it comes to missing injuries, Sammy Walker could be very, very much in play, Ryan. What do you reckon? Because I know for your team, you're looking at Sam Walker pretty hard.
Yeah, mate, I think he's in this week. It's either Sammy Walker or Dylan Brown. I'll have to sit down and look at their draws, but I think Sammy Walker, you know, like the Roosters back at full strength, they're just killing it. He covers 13 and 16, I think, from memory. I think the Roosters. So good buy cover, good vibes, James, because I'm getting rid of a vibes guy in SJ. I need another vibes guy.
You need like for like badly there, yeah.
And Dylan Brown, like, I know he's a really good SuperCoach guy, but the vibes are not good. So I just don't. I think I'm going to go the vibes guy. That's where I'm leaning. This week is a weird one for me. I brought in Dom Young and Drinky for RTS and Tom Turbo. Now, you hear those trades at the end of the weekend, you go, oh, yeah, you reacted to the hamstring news. Mate, Patreon, I locked that in on Thursday. I was like, yeah, they're my 2 trades, thinking, don't know how Turbo's going to go. Like, RTS is still pretty average and pretty well. And then they both got ruled out with hamstring injuries. Like, it was crazy. So almost, had a little curse there. So hopefully that doesn't continue. But I scored 11.27, not too bad. I captained Drinky, so that was a bit, but across the board, my team didn't do much. I think bringing Dom Young in saved me, which was huge. So yeah, trades-wise, I've been a bit all over the place. Like I've wanted Fino for like 3-4 weeks. Haven't been able to bring him in. I've wanted. I was going to go Dylan Armstrong this week and then didn't. I'm regretting that a bit because I held off to think that Suafalongo would be the go this week, but he wasn't fantastic either. And then Paps could be back by kind of round 15-ish. So I'm not sure. I may even just do the one trade, which is just blasphemy for me. But I'm sure. Look, I say that going into Magic Round, even if I only made one trade over the Magic Round weekend, I'm sure another one. There'll be a vibes trade in there somewhere or a beers trade in there somewhere for sure. So
100%.
yeah. I think if, especially because we're going to the Saturday, I reckon I'll try. I don't know who the games are yet, but I might try and get like a high upside player for the Saturday, just because I saw something somewhere where it was like there was a guy who was coming, I think 40th or 50th, and he was still like 300 points off first. And I'm just like,
Really?
yeah, something. It was something ridiculous like that, and I was just like, oh man, like I'm doing okay at 2000th or something like that, and I'm like, I must be so
Yeah.
far off first. So I just kind of go, well, I'm just going vibes. I just want vibes. I've good, like still good super coach moves, but Sammy Walker, good vibes guy, and then I reckon that's the other one is I'll have a look at the Saturday games. This is going a bit rogue, James, but that's why you're the Supercoach expert and I'm just the physio. But I reckon high upside, outside back on Saturday, someone who plays might be my goer just to kind of ride home. Yeah.
Tell you what about Dylan Brown though, Brien, is he's going to get named Jewel in round 12 because he
That's
played a lot
why,
of games
yeah,
at 7. So
100%.
there is that argument to make that you could get a guy that's 7 and 6 eligible, which gives you that bit of positional flexibility. I was just checking before, Brien. Dom Young is updated to 160 at the moment. So my score has skyrocketed to 1302. I am having a good old Sunday night here. That's probably been one of my greatest ever plays. I will not live that down when I see you all at Magic Round next week. I'm going to dine out on that.
Imagine if you had
deluxe.
done that at Magic Round. I would have lost my
See you later.
mind.
See you later. That
was like me last Magic Round when I put like $100 on Val to it wasn't $100. It was like $10, but it was paying
for a triple.
50 to 1 for a triple, and he scored 2. Like I was like, oh my god, that could have been.
Mate, we're riding him hard because he's full cramp, and you're like, come on, Val, just get back in off your wing. And from 60-minute onwards, he didn't touch the ball. I don't reckon he was just a passenger because he was so cooked. But boy, that was a fun night, and man, we were riding him hard. But poor Val, he had cramps deluxe, didn't touch the footy for the last 20 minutes. Which really killed it at the end there. But anyway.
So yeah, I think my number one advice to anybody who's playing Supercoach and going to Magic Round this weekend is like at least make one of your trades of vibes. Just like it can still be smart, it can still be along the line. But if you've got a guy who's like one of your favorite players or whatever, or you're going to be at that game and you're going to be having a good time, the last game on a Saturday night or something when you'll be peaking, just get them in because it's just like that's what you play. Like I know you play it to win, you play it to come whatever 1,000 you want to come or 100 or top 100 or whatever. But there's no supplement for that feeling, right? That feeling for me with Val last year was just insane. And like we've had the story, I still remember the draft story of one of our mates, we won't name him because we don't want to embarrass him too much, but we all went to a Roosters Bronx game, I believe it was. Was it Roosters Bronx?
And it was Bronx Canberra.
And
he
benched Anthony Milford in Milford's prime because Milford had a shit 3 weeks. And then Milford went, scored 130 points. Yeah. And this dude could not have been down harder. And all the boys are there. And that's just, so if you're going to Magic Round, please do make it a smart trade, make it make sense with all the, listen to your podcast, the other Supercoach podcast this week and figure out the stats and all that kind of stuff. But just make it vibey. Make it that if it comes off, because it will make your Magic Round even better. And that's hard to say because Magic Round is already so awesome. But yeah, do it.
You get the Bunnies Cowboys in that last game on Saturday. Probably has the ability to be a fairly high scoring game, that one, doesn't it? There's going to be a lot of drop footy and probably a lot of bottom 8 footy, but there should be a few points getting scored around those games. So might be worth looking. I guess Drinky's the big one, isn't it? You're going to be trading him in and hoping that he just goes absolutely ballistic. But there's a few Bunnies guys that have really bottomed out in price. The Bunnies are looking pretty woeful, but there's still, your Latrells and Codys. You could sort of roll the dice on there at a basement price. if you're chasing that vibe and chasing that upside. But I like the Sam Walker take, Brian. They had the Sharks on the Saturday at 5:30. But I tell you what, the Roosters can't be stopped at the moment. They're a slick looking unit, hey, and they just got strike everywhere at the moment. They're in such good nick. They really are.
Yeah, I reckon Sammy Walker's probably going to be my vibe pick. Like, just bring him in and we can just ride him hard, like on the Saturday at Suncorp. Is that the second game?
Yes, second game.
Sweet. So we'll have a couple under the belt and just be loving life. Sammy Walker in our SuperCoach teams. That's locked and loaded. It's not Dylan Brown. I can tell you now. It's going to be Sam Walker for sure for that vibe. That'll be sweet. Awesome, guys. All right. Sorry to keep you so long, but it's been a big week. Obviously, the Cleary Turbo thing took a while. Anybody at Magic Round who sees the sponges walking around and wants to have a yarn, by all means, grab us. Apologise if we're in some sort of state, especially late at night on Saturday. I'm hoping I'll be able to get to the Friday games just for a few casual beers and just catch up on the games. But Saturday will be our big day. We'll be, I think we said last week, we'll probably be upstairs at Lord Alfred directly after the games and then romping around Caco until the hours of early Sunday. James, I can't wait till next Saturday, mate. The next time I see you, we will be heading into Magic Round. How good? Have a good week. Get better. Sorry I've held you this long, not feeling so good. You go get some sleep and we'll do it all again for Magic Round Sunday next week. That's going to be a rough pod.
100%. Well, Brian, you're another year older and another year wiser, so you'll be in good form come Saturday night. I'm expecting one of your best ever performances on and off the tiles at Caxton Street Hotel. So it's going to be good. I can't wait.
Mate, I'm going to need some energy, I tell you. All right, guys, as always, up the mighty, mighty Redcliffe Dolphins.